Hello, everybody, and welcome back. We have for you guys a professional ultra runner, race director, and motivational speaker right out of Truckee, California. If you guys are familiar, it's a hotspot for the ultra running, all things outdoor adventures. We have Adam Kimble for you guys today. Thank you so much for joining us, Adam.
Yeah, thanks, Kyla. I'm so stoked to be here. Looking forward to a fun conversation.
Yeah, so we are going to dive into all things FKT, nutrition, altitude training with Adam here shortly. And for those of you guys who maybe don't know, he was on a TV show called The Wheel, which he won. So we are going to dive into hopefully some nutrition conversation around that and just general health. I'm curious to dive into how that all worked out. But before, of course, we get to know too much about you, let's dive straight into your two truths and a lie.
Okay, so my two truths and a lie. Number one, I have run across 4 different countries.
Okay.
Number two, I won the showcase on The Price is Right.
Mm.
And number three, I signed a Major League Baseball contract.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I saw some Price is Right stuff on your Insta, so I feel like that might be true. The country thing might be true, although it could have been like 3 countries and not 4 countries. What do you think, Amanda?
That's what I'm wondering, if maybe there's like a tricky thing in the country thing. I feel like
Yeah,
I could see there might be like a baseball thing.
yeah. I don't see any
I'll go
baseball
with
like
the
paraphernalia on his wall behind him or anything, though.
I'll go with Major League Baseball contract. Maybe it was like you were like almost made it. And that's how you
I
got
kind
into
of
ultra
agree with
running?
you, but don't tell us the answer because we'll reveal it to the listeners at the end.
Okay,
So,
perfect.
those are all really good ones. Stumped us for sure. Okay, so tell us a little bit about your history growing up. What got you excited and into trail running, ultra running? Like, how did all this evolve?
Yeah, so my background is just as a sports fanatic. Actually it's interesting. I was talking to my family about this recently. I have one older brother who is not interested in sports like really at all. I mean, he played sports, but it was more for like social reasons, having the friends and stuff on teams. Whereas I
Mm.
was just from the jump, I was just obsessed with whatever it was that I was playing. So throughout like my younger years, it was like a mix of everything. And then when I got into like junior high and high school, I was playing baseball, basketball, and football.
Mm.
Running was actually like my least favorite aspect of those sports at the time. But yeah, I've always been like a competitive, really driven person, and I've always loved what that has like brought out in me and taught me. And
Mm.
so it wasn't until later in life, I played baseball in college, and then later after I graduated, it was like a couple of years later, I started kind of casually dabbling in running. I had like my father-in-law was running 5Ks, 10Ks, even some
Mm.
marathons. And so I was around the scene a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I started doing it myself, it was like I just kept taking these steps and going further and further, and then just fell in love with the sport. So it started with I was training for a half marathon. A lot of people, like they love, and I really love race day, but a lot of people like live for race day. It turned out that I loved the training as much as I loved the race.
That's awesome.
And so that like kind of led to a love of preparing for, future races and longer distances. So ran my first marathon in 2012. That was when I was still living in Chicago or in Illinois. That was the Chicago Marathon.
Nice.
Then over the next couple of years, ran a couple more marathons. And then in 2014, a friend of mine invited me, and actually he's my best friend, and he crews me at like all of my races now. But
Nice.
he invited me to a 50K trail race in Indiana. That was my first ultra and first like real trail race.
Wow.
And that was kind of like this jumping off point, and I've never looked back since then.
Amazing. Amazing. And out of curiosity, like what drew you to gorgeous Truckee, Tahoe area? Was it the trails or?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so my wife and I actually in 2015, we were both working in Chicago. We quit our jobs, traveled for a year.
Nice.
During that time, we went to we went to like 18 different countries. We're all over the place. But our
Wow.
favorite, still my favorite place on earth to this day is Queenstown, New Zealand. It's on the South
Oh,
Island of New Zealand, and it's like Tahoe is sort of like the North American version of that. It's like,
Really?
yeah, like beautiful mountains, alpine lakes,
Mm,
just like really, really, picturesque, beautiful setting and awesome trails.
wow.
And so after we got back from that trip, we wanted to move west. We knew that.
Mm,
But originally we were looking at Colorado. We just had more familiarity. We had traveled there
mhm.
more frequently. But then, as fate would have it, my wife got a job in Truckee, and we've been here ever since.
Cool. That's
Yeah,
exciting. Awesome.
yeah.
So being in Truckee, exploring, did that lead you to the Tahoe Rim or like, well, how did this FKT come about? Where you're like, I need a new adventure or a new challenge.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, if you've ever, for anyone that's listening that's ever been on the Tahoe Rim Trail, it is an absolute world-class trail.
Yeah.
172 miles, 29,000 feet of elevation gain, but like
Wow.
so much of it is like runnable, pretty single
Hmm.
track trail. You go through some like amazing sections. One of my personal favorites is Desolation Wilderness, which is on
Mm,
the west side of the lake. And
yeah.
also a cool part about that area is the Tahoe Rim Trail and the Pacific Crest Trail sync up there. So you've got a long stretch where you'll see like through hikers on the PCT,
Cool.
and then people doing the Tahoe Rim Trail at the same time. And yeah, just such a pretty trail. So once we moved here, I was initially we were living in Tahoe City for several years, and I just was training on the Tahoe Rim Trail all the time, and it became
Mm,
my like go-to training ground.
nice.
And then at a certain point, like you spend enough time in the sport, you start looking around, like what are some of like I love races and I do a lot of races, but I also started looking at like the FKT world, and it's like what are some of like the big long trail efforts around here that are kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
And instantly, like it was like, okay, the Tahoe Rim Trail is my training ground. It's in my backyard. Logistics make sense and are easy. And the record at the time was held by Kilian Jornet, who's like many people would consider the greatest men's ultra runner of all time.
Yeah.
So all of those things made it like immensely appealing to me.
Hmm. Wow. That's awesome. And so for our listeners, what is kind of like base elevation and maybe peak elevation that you hit on the FKT?
Yeah, so the whole Tahoe Rim Trail is kind of between like 6,000 feet and a little over 10,000. So you
Okay.
spend, I actually don't know like the median elevation, but I would guess it's probably like between 7 and 7,500.
Okay.
And then you top out at Relay Peak, which is kind of on like the northeast side of the lake. That's the high
Mm.
point on the actual rim trail.
Hmm.
There's some peaks in Tahoe that are taller than that, but on the actual rim trail, the high point is Relay Peak. And
Hmm.
so it's like 10,200.
Okay.
So yeah, so you get up over 10, but you spend a lot of your time in kind of that like 7 to 8 range.
Yeah. And how long had you been living in Tahoe, getting that altitude exposure practice before taking this on?
Yeah, so we got out here at the end of 2016, and then I broke the record in 2020, like summer of 2020. So
Okay.
kind of like three full years.
Yeah.
I actually though first attempted the record in
Mm,
2019, and I completed the loop, but didn't break the record.
gotcha.
And yeah, it was one of those things like there was a few logistics that myself and
Mm,
my team kind of messed up,
mm,
and it was like I'll never forget this. It was such like a ridiculous feeling to have, but I finished the 172 miles in it was October of 2019. I
mm.
finished, and all I could think was I have to do this again. Like I just completed this massive effort, and I know I have to do it again because I didn't do it right the first time.
Yeah.
Um,
Shoot.
yeah, so
Yeah. And so what were those kind of like takeaways you learned from the first attempt at it?
really the main thing was the rim trail is set up really nicely from like a crewing standpoint.
Mm,
Basically in like 20-mile intervals, there are very accessible big trailheads that your crew can get to.
nice.
So like you can have people reaching you and this was a supported FKT, so you can have
Hmm.
as much help as you want. So it's easy for the crew to get to these points. The tough thing is in between those 20-mile segments, there are some areas where it's you need like assistance, and unless you have somebody with you, like someone pacing you
Mm,
that's got nutrition fluids,
hmm.
it can be tough. So that first time that I did it, the first 40 miles I ran solo, then I had a pacer for the
Oh.
last 130 plus.
Mm,
And in basically from miles 20 to 40, there was a section where the crew was supposed to meet me and it's this very, very steep trail that's kind of tough to get to.
Yeah.
And there was just a little miscommunication on timing, and I missed them at that spot.
Shoot.
So there was like a 2 to 3 hour stretch where I was completely out of water and nutrition.
Owie.
And then when I saw them again, I like ate a bunch of food, drank a bunch of fluids, but as many endurance athletes will know, there's like this delay effect, right? Where, so I got to them, I consumed a bunch of stuff, and then 2 hours later, I was like, it was just total depletion. And, it took me like several hours to bounce back from that.
Yeah.
Whereas the second time when I broke the record, I was like, okay, we need to have somebody with me. So I ran the first 20 solo, and then the rest I had a pacer with me. And then I also had some other friends that were, because I had a bunch of friends that were like, hey, is there anything I can do to help? So, for example, my friend Jack, the spot that my crew missed me the last time, I had him hike up, and he had a backpack with like ice water and Coke and like all kinds of stuff like that. And so in addition to having the pacer, I also had this backup plan of just in case we're like low on fluids. And it just so happened I did it in July of 2020. And so it was warm. And so it was actually really helpful to have those extra pieces in place because it was such a hot day.
Definitely. Wow. So when you're choosing to attempt an FKT like this, having done it twice in 2 different months, it sounds like, what, like, are you thinking about temperature conditions when you're choosing this, or is it more based off of where you are in your training, or how are you making that decision?
Yeah, it's funny. So my initial assessment of that, my mind, let's just say this, after doing it the second time, my mind completely changed on what I thought I valued in observing that. So what I mean by that is the first attempt I made was in October. And if you look historically, a lot of the men's and women's records on the Tahoe Rim Trail were set in September, including Killian. And part of that is it's fall, the temperatures are a little cooler, less people. It's just like a good time of the year, like if it's a big snow year, the snow is melted by then. So there's those kind of factors. And so I did October mainly because it was like a scheduling thing. I had a race a couple of months earlier. I want to give myself enough time to recover from the race. So that's what I was thinking. What I found out was after the fact, I realized that I placed much higher value on daylight than I did on temperature. So in July, much hotter temperatures, but so much more daylight. It was like, it was crazy what a difference that made. And so I broke the record and ran it in 37 hours, a little over 37 hours. And like 8 of those hours were in the dark. The rest was all in light. Whereas the first time it took me 45, and it felt like half of that was in the dark,
Oh man.
Yeah. So, so it was one of those things where I knew it was going to be a lot hotter, but also it turned out that it was worth it in exchange for, having those daylight hours.
Yeah. Interesting. And with that too, with having it be supported, Amanda and I were talking prior, and we've had we worked with some ultra endurance athletes that are doing non-supported stuff as well. And a big topic is like water and refilling and purification systems. Like, did you have to use any of that in the supported version, or were you able to have enough water with the support there?
Yeah, I actually did end up using that. So one of my favorite pieces of equipment is a Katadyn 0.6 liter filter that you can actually like squeeze down to like this big, really, really small when you're not using it. And that was super helpful. And especially, it was one of those things where I thought I had all this stuff in place that would cover me, and I did, but it was still, it was like an 80 something degree day. And over the course of like a long day, you're out there all day. You just need more fluids than you think. And so the other nice thing about a July, for example, is that a lot of the streams are flowing. So that was super helpful. I was able to cool off in those streams, and then also filter water and get that as I needed it to. Whereas in October, no streams are flowing. You might get snow potentially. But in terms of like actual water on the trail, there's not going to be anything.
Yeah. Shoot. Yeah. That's an interesting kind of perspective of like how to properly, or how to attempt it. Right. I know, like, I always talk to our cyclist friends, like on Strava, it's like, they always pick a day where it's like nice and cool. Maybe it rained 2 days prior. The trail's nice and tacky for grip. Like, there's like the time to like time it, to get the best kind of terrain traction, like temperature control, that kind of stuff. So that's super interesting. And so with the kind of prep leading up to these 2 FKT like completions, or do I call it a win? FKT
Yeah,
win
yeah.
versus like
Success.
success versus the attempt. What are you doing in terms of like are you training for altitude exposure in any way further than, or I guess more so than just living at altitude? Are you doing anything from a training perspective, or like hyperbaric or anything like that, out of curiosity?
Yeah, I wasn't doing any like no hyperbaric chamber or anything like that, but what I was trying to do was just get as high as possible as often as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So knowing that the trail was frequently between 7 and 8,000 feet, it was
Mm-hmm.
like I want to get up above 8 as much as I can and
Yeah.
just feel that, like I've run, for example, I've run the Leadville 100 before. I ran that a couple of years ago. I was actually out crewing and pacing a friend this year,
Nice.
and that whole race is above 10,000 feet. And even living at 6 here, or a little over 6 here, it's going up to 10 is just like a different thing. It just feels so much different. It's so much different on the body. And like from a digestion standpoint, it's like harder to process food that high. So I just wanted to, the Tahoe Rim Trail is not average 10,000 feet. It's the high point, but I just knew I wanted to spend as much time as high as I could fueling, getting my body used to that, and just preparing myself for that, so that when I made the attempt, it was like no surprises.
Yeah. You're just doing like repeat laps up to Lac.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, I mean, like the nice thing is from a start, there's like Tahoe is so great because there's a combination of like, you can get remote really quick. You can go to places like Desolation Wilderness is a great example.
Yeah.
There's like areas there where if you get 10 miles from a trailhead, you're not going to see anybody. And then there's other spots like Mount Rose Highway, which goes up to Mount Rose, which you can get up to like 8,000, 9,000 feet. You can start there. You can drive there, start there, and then do runs from there.
Yeah.
So it makes it like logistically easy to get what you need from a training stimulus standpoint, which is really nice.
That's great.
So yeah, so it was a little combination of that. The other funny thing about I forgot to mention this about me breaking the record in 2020 is that the only reason that happened, like, so I told you I finished in 2019. I knew I wanted to do it again. The only reason I did it in 2020 was because of the pandemic. So I had this race schedule outlined, and part of that race schedule was I was going to run the Tahoe Rim Trail 100 miler, which takes place in July. That race, along with pretty much every other race, got canceled that year. So my friends who were going to make the trip out to support me for that race, they were like, hey, can we still come out? And I said, yeah. And then I started thinking, I'm like, oh, maybe I should make a second attempt on the rim trail because they're going to be here. They can crew me. Yeah. And so that's what we did. And then we ended up breaking the record then. So it was kind of like a funny twist of fate, where I wasn't even like, I knew I was going to do it again, but it could have been like 2, 3, 4, 5 years later. And it just so happened it was like 8 months later.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So, and you didn't realize that you were going to do that until like what, like March of 2020 or?
Yeah, exactly. It was like March or April even. Yeah. Cause I ran a 100-mile race in New Zealand in February. And then I remember got home from that, and then the walls started crumbling. And so, yeah, I think the race was officially canceled like in early April. So it was like, yeah, just like a few months. And I was like, well, I was already planning to be out there. Might as well,
that's awesome.
Go for it again. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. I wonder how many FKTs got broken during like 2020. Cause I think a lot of people were trying to just find ways to get out and continue to challenge themselves.
Yeah. I don't know the exact numbers, but I know it was astronomically higher than like any other year for sure. Yeah.
That's cool. That's really neat. So, okay. Nutrition, hydration, FKT. We can talk about both situations if they were different, and maybe some comparisons, but what are you doing? How are you planning nutrition for this 37+ hour attempt? And was that your goal time, 37-ish?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, my goal. So Killian's time was 38 hours and 32 minutes.
Wow.
And then I ran 37:12. But honestly, like my goal time was anything under 38, 32.
Yeah.
Like I kind of, my splits, I kind of set out for like 38 hours. And then came in faster than that, which was great. I just cruised. Yeah.
That's awesome. Wow. Yeah. So what does prep look like from a nutrition perspective? Like for 37 hours or 38 hours of nutrition, how are you laying all this out and planning this?
Yeah, for me, it's the have like a million options
Yeah.
because you're going to need them. So what my general strategy was, I know, and I've kind of shifted more towards this in recent years, but it's just generally, it's just easier to consume liquid calories.
Yeah.
So I focused a little more on that. So there's
Mm-hmm.
there's a product I use called they actually changed the name. It's a Scratch Labs, a company that makes hydration
Oh, yeah.
mixes.
Mm-hmm.
They had a thing called Super Fuel. Now I think it's called High Carb.
Yep.
But it's
Yeah.
basically like a low flavor, high calorie drink mix. So I was having a lot of that. My goal, so traditionally I'm always trying to get, and I fall on the higher end of this, I found, just because it works for me. But because most, like a lot of people shoot for quite a bit less than this, but I've just realized that more calories generally works better for me.
Yeah.
So I try to stay in like the per hour in like the 300 to 400 calorie range. 60-ish grams of carbs. I don't like track it super, super closely, but I'm like,
Yeah.
I have like a pulse on it, you know, it's
Yeah.
like, okay, this is about what I'm getting. And so my strategy on the Rim Trail was, I told you there's like these big sections where I wasn't going to be with the crew. So I thought, okay, I'm going to treat this as more like race style fueling with hydration mixes, gels, bars, you know, like easy to consume and carry things. And then as soon as I'd get to those points where I'd see the crew, then it was like try to eat as much whole food style stuff as possible. So
Awesome.
they had a little grill out there. They were making me like egg burritos and
oh my gosh,
and stuff like that, which was really cool. Quesadillas.
that's great.
You know.
Yum.
Yeah, so it was kind of that approach. It was like the race style food in between seeing the crew, and then as much as I could stomach when I saw them.
Yeah.
And it's interesting for me. It's probably the case for a lot of people. It's always harder to chew and consume food when it's hotter.
Yeah.
So I was able to, the overnight hours, I was able to get more calories in.
Nice.
Just because it was not as hot, my body could digest it better, probably wasn't moving as fast too. And so so it was just like I said, it's a mixture of all these things, just whatever you can, because at a certain point, especially on something where you're out there for 37 hours, it's truly just like calories in, you know.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
however you can get that fuel, you need it. And then if you get behind on it, you're in trouble, you know.
Yeah.
So I was just doing everything I could to stay on top of that.
When you're getting to the section where you're about to meet your crew who's like scrambling you egg burritos and all that stuff, like, are you physically feeling hungry, or are you just slamming down as much as you can without puking?
Yeah. It's probably more the latter. It's like, it's not like force feeding, but it's like, I just know I need to get this down. And then for me, the hunger always comes later, you know, like 24 hours after I'm done, I'm ravenous and can eat everything. But yeah, during it, it's just like the I don't know, just your energy output is such that it just makes it hard to get that down. But again, I just knew it was like, okay. And I've always kind of looked at it from like and you would obviously know a lot more about this than me, but I've always looked at it from like fueling from like the glycemic index, where it's like, okay, I want some things that are going to like hit me quickly higher on the glycemic index, and some slow burn stuff that's going to like give me fuel for a longer period of time. And generally with like the more whole food stuff, I know that stuff is longer lasting, slower burning. And so I wanted to make sure I was kind of layering it in, you know. It's like sometimes I'll take a gel and like right away I'm like, all right, feeling the energy, and then like 10 minutes later it's like boom, you know, brings it down. So I just wanted to make sure that I was kind of like consistently staying topped off the whole time and not hitting these huge lows, especially because the first time that I did it, that was like my downfall, you know. So I was just trying to like cover my bases there.
That's great. And so with kind of the nutrition piece, you mentioned kind of your gels, the liquid nutrition, and then real food when you get to see them. What are you mentioned the scrambled, like the egg burritos and stuff like that. Any other real food stuff that you've found works like well for you or doesn't cause any GI distress?
One thing that's like always worked well for me is like a kind of like a sweet potato hash.
Yum.
Just like mixing up like sweet potatoes, even like black beans.
Wow,
eggs,
good for you. Goodness.
Like yeah, I mean, it's like I found that some of this stuff, I generally speaking, my stomach handles most things pretty well. Like
that's great.
I'm not somebody traditionally that's like puking in races.
You're lucky.
Yeah, I know. But I also like, sometimes I will have like stomach issues where I'm just like uncomfortable or, GI distress during the race. So I try to avoid that. The thing about like this is the Tahoe Rim Trail, for example, is the style of it is different in that you have to be moving well to run at that speed, but it's compared to a 100-mile race, like the output is different.
Yeah.
And so anytime I'm like, I can consume more of that whole food style stuff when I'm not pushing as hard.
Right.
And so that is helpful as well,
Definitely.
but yeah, I just like, it's like whatever I can get down, but usually some form of like potatoes, eggs, and I'm a pescatarian too. I eat fish, but I don't eat meat.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's like, it's usually those kind of mixes that work well for me.
Awesome. And what are your go-to, you mentioned the super high carb drink mix, but you said gels, and what are your go-to kind of in that area?
Yeah, I've actually in recent years I've come to really love the Morton gels.
Oh yeah.
I use those. I actually don't like their drink mix at all.
Yeah.
So I've tried that before, not a fan.
Yeah.
But I really do like the gels. I'll also do like chews. So Scratch Labs has like some chews as well. I like to use those.
Nice.
And then the other thing I like Spring Energy gels as well. Again, rice based. Like longer lasting energy. So I like to mix that up. And from like a flavor standpoint, it's nice to just have things that are like a little bit different for your palate. Don't get that palate fatigue.
Yeah. Yeah. We're big fans of Spring Energy as well. I mean, they just have, I like the real food aspect, but not everybody, it doesn't work. All different things are different for everybody, it seems like, from a gut perspective. So with the 37-hour time, what's caffeine consumption like?
Yeah. Heavy.
Yeah. How are you dosing that? Like, are you doing capsules? Are you doing caffeinated products? Like, what is that like?
Yeah, good question. It was a combination of both those things. I also very much, and I do this before all of my races. First of all, I taper off my caffeine. I usually drink like 1 to 2 cups of coffee a day. And before races, I'll like the week or 10 days before, I'll switch to decaf. And just like try to cut out caffeine completely, because then I've noticed for myself, then on race day, I really feel the effects of it. So I like to do that. So I did that before this. And then I usually also use it as like a carrot during the race, where I'll say, okay, I'm not touching caffeine until I'm halfway through this, and so I did that. I forget what I waited till, maybe 100K. It was like 60 plus miles into the Tahoe Rim Trail. I finally took some caffeine. I had some caffeine pills. And then usually it's like soda is something that has worked well for me. I like Coke has always worked well in races for me.
Yeah.
So just using that when I can, especially on like hotter days, because it's it tastes so good to be drinking on a hot day. And it's funny too, because that's another thing I don't consume in my everyday life. Like I don't drink soda ever except in races. So it feels like it's like this. I tell people it's like rocket fuel, which it should be, because there's like a stupid amount of sugar in each can. But yeah, so it was a combination of all those things. And I tried to like spread it out too, so that it's just more, I don't want my body to get to this point where it's not even feeling what I'm putting into it. So that's a big part of it, is just making sure that I'm layering it so that when I am using it, it's like a performance advantage, as opposed to your body's just like numb to this.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. Yeah. I always think it's fascinating with the Coke or soda situation in racing, is like, if there's any prime time to drink a soda, it's when you're in like a high state of exertion. Like, think about that, and then compare it to somebody who's like sitting at their desk on their computer drinking a soda. It's like, you don't need that for that. But if there's a prime time to use it, it's like full like gas, or 172-mile race.
No, totally. I remember, I don't remember when exactly this was, but several years ago, maybe like a decade ago, I remember when I started paying more attention to nutrition, even before I became a professional ultra runner. I remember looking at things like that. It was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that like that that like people are consuming this product on like a regular basis, because
Yeah.
if you look at the nutrition, you're like, this is crazy how
Hmm.
much sugar and how much
Yeah.
junk is in this, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, it's like at a certain point, that's like one of the things I love about ultra running is there's at a certain point there's just a simplicity to it, you know. It's like you have to get from point A to point B. Your body needs what it needs to get you there, and like at a certain point it's just like I said, calories in. So that can be
Mm-hmm.
a Coca-Cola, that can be something much healthier than that.
Yeah.
But your body just needs the fuel to keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. So hydration, what are you like? Did you have a target per hour? Are you just drinking to thirst? Are you kind of pushing that a little bit?
Yeah, it's I'm always kind of drinking to thirst, but again, it's another thing that I'm like kind of have a pulse on.
Hmm.
I find for me about, and this, for some people this is a lot, but about 30 ounces an hour
Mm-hmm.
is good for me.
Yeah.
I always carry, well, I guess it depends on, typically I'll be carrying two 500 milliliter bottles, soft
Hmm.
flasks.
Hmm.
And yeah, I've just found that like for me, the 30-ounce range is pretty spot on,
Yeah.
to where I feel like I'm hydrated, I'm still peeing,
Hmm.
and like, but I'm not feeling like water belly where, you
Yeah.
know, things are uncomfortable because I've been drinking so much.
Yeah. The stomach
Yeah.
slosh. Do you, with kind of the fluid consumption piece and talking about peeing, that is one of the questions I hear a lot of athletes ask is like, how often should they be peeing in 30 seconds, like in,
Hmm.
in an endurance event?
Yeah.
What do you kind of aim for or feel like think is a good spot for you personally?
Yeah, I honestly, not to get like too deep into this, but
Yeah.
I'm like, I always pay very like close attention to the color of the
Yep.
pee. So
So
more.
how do you do that when you're out on the trail is the question.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so you know, it's harder at night. You got your like headlamp, but yeah, I'm always just like whenever I pull off on the trail, or
Mhm.
if I'm at it lucky enough to be at an aid station where there's facilities,
Oh yeah.
I'm just like, yeah, I'm just looking and making sure if I
Hmm.
notice it's like, for me, if it's like dark yellow, then I'm like,
Hmm.
okay, we need some more
Yeah.
fluids now. And anything worse than that, obviously too.
Yeah.
But usually I do a pretty good job of staying on top of that, and sometimes I'll
Hmm.
notice it and then immediately I'm like, you got to drink more.
Yeah.
And so, you know, then I just try to correct a little bit, without
Hmm.
overdoing it, and that tends to work pretty well. I would say, like, if I had to guess, I would say in like 100-mile race, it's probably like 5 times,
Hmm.
maybe. Yeah, that sounds about right. Maybe even a little more than
Wow.
that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, just it's one of the yeah, just one of those things that I'm always kind of, it's always kind of in the back of my head to make
Yeah.
sure that you don't get behind on that, because then, you know, some of those times when if you do notice that your urine is dark, then it's like
Hmm.
your body can start shutting down, you can
Yeah.
start cramping, and all these things
Hmm.
come into play. So it's
Yeah.
important to keep an eye on that.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think some people want the convenience of not having to stop, or, and so they don't want to have to pee. But I think it is, yeah, with these endurance events, it's important that your system's still processing things through.
Yeah. And if you look at it from like a lot of people can be pretty inefficient at aid stations. You know, like they get to an aid
Mm-hmm.
station, their crew's there, they spend far too much time. If you're
Yeah.
efficient with your time there, then you can spend a minute, a few,
Yeah.
you know, like you've got some time to spread around. It's really just
Definitely.
about how you use that time, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, someone might think I don't have enough time to like pee this many times, but then they're spending 10 extra minutes in the aid station they don't need to.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you look at it that way, it's like there's always time that you can kind of spread around to make it work.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And with kind of to follow up on the fluids too, are you adding any additional sodium to your consumption, in addition to like what's naturally present in the scratch or your chews or any of that stuff?
Yeah, I usually take, so I actually used to take like salt tabs.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's I guess you could still call them salt tabs. Now I use these things that it's like an electrolyte chew, I think is maybe what they call them. But
Oh, is
it's
that
made by
the
Salt
salt
Stick.
stick?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
And this, it's such like a personalized thing, but the reason that I
Mm-hmm.
switched to those is I was taking the tabs before, and that like you just swallow it and then it has an impact. There's something about chewing it up that that makes my brain be like, yeah, you're getting like the salt and the electrolytes that you need, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was more of like a personal preference on my part, but I just really like the feeling, like the granulation of the
Yeah.
thing that I'm chewing and that going straight into my system. So
Yeah.
those have worked pretty well for me.
That's awesome. Yeah. Those are a handy tool. I think like I haven't checked the sodium amount, but I know like the capsule versions, like the sodium is just not that much. Like you'd have to consume a lot of the capsules. Like it's like 40 milligrams or something. So it's like, depending on someone's sodium losses, I mean, you're taking down a bunch of capsules potentially. Like,
yeah, totally. And I think that's one of those things too, that, you know, some people I know are afraid to like over salt during a race. But if it's hot and you're exerting yourself, I've found it's hard to do that, you know?
Yeah.
Like it's hard. You're sweating and losing so much that I feel like it's like it would be tough for somebody to overdo that if the conditions were hot like that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure we get time to talk about the wheels, but what does post race like after this? Well, actually one quick question. I imagine you didn't sleep at all during the 37 hours, right? There's no like power naps going on?
No, so my strategy was I was going to get two. So I followed the same traditionally. People can do whatever they want, but traditionally the accepted method is to do the same route as the record holder did. So I could have gone in whatever direction I wanted and it still would have counted for the record, but I wanted to do what Killian did. So he started in Tahoe City, went clockwise. And so I did the same thing. So going that direction. And actually the cool thing is if you like look at the maps that the Tahoe Rim Trail Association puts out, the technical starting point is Tahoe City. So it's actually like following their route. So I started there, and then a little over 100 miles in is a trailhead called Big Meadow, and it's in South Lake Tahoe. And so I told myself, getting to 100 miles, that's over halfway. I was like, I'll plan to get there, and then it should be like middle of the morning. And if I'm tired, I'll try to go to sleep, and then if not, we'll see what happens. So I got there. I was feeling pretty tired. We had our crew vehicle was a Sprinter van that my friend let us borrow, and so I hopped in there, laid down, and then like at the time I was a little bit behind Killian's record, but kind of right on it. And my brain knew that.
Yes.
So it was like, this isn't going to happen. So I laid there for, I think, close to 10 minutes, and my eyes were open the whole time. It was restful in the sense that like I was relaxing, but then I was like, we got to get out of here. So I didn't end up sleeping at all.
Yeah. I can imagine like that's gotta be hard, especially if you're like adrenaline's just gotta be going. I would imagine as well, but goodness.
And then it's funny because you're like in the moment, at times you can be so tired. I remember the overnight section was rough. You know, like during the day, there's other trail users that you're interacting with, and some of them are asking questions like, what are you doing out here? And all that stuff. And so it's like fun and energizing. And then at night, everyone's off the trail. There's no one out there. If you're lucky, you see a bear or like some, some animals to keep you company. But so that was tough. And like you get real tired, but then it was funny after I finished 37 hours, no sleep. And I was totally wired that rest of that night, you know? So it was like, then I couldn't go to sleep even though I wanted to.
Right.
So it's just interesting how that works.
Yeah. The fight or flight, maybe caffeine, who knows, like all that stuff still filtering through.
Totally.
What is kind of recovery, like not being able to sleep, but are you trying to get nutrition in like right when you finish, or are you kind of like, so like, no, I can't handle any more food right now? What is like the immediate kind of like couple hours post finish like for you?
Yeah, it's usually like if I can get something in, get it in, but usually I'm pretty averse to it at that point. So it's, you know, I'll typically like go to sleep, and then the next day it's like, okay, let's start the recovery process and get in all the nutrition that I need, and also start eating like not sugary race foods. So that's like, and it's crazy too, because I almost every time it's like, and now I've gotten to the point where I can like really recognize it, but my body, especially after a hotter race, my body is just craving salt, and I can feel it, you know? So it's like, it's always like, I always want savory stuff, nothing sweet at all. Someone puts a dessert in front of me, I'm like, no. So it's trying to get in that nutrition and get the body back to that like nice level of homeostasis and
Yeah.
fueling as much as you can. Like I said, for me, it's anywhere between like 24 to 48 hours post where I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I can eat everything.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's giving the body that. And then of course it's like, for me, it's just lots and lots of hydration,
Yeah.
continuing to drink fluids and get the body, as hydrated as possible.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I think that's helpful for our listeners as well, who are doing their ultra stuff, because goodness, many of them run into the same situation. I have a few clients now where we've kind of like trained them a little bit, but they're starting to fall into like after a race, or like I crave colorful fruits and veggies, and like, like they want real food, which is great. So I mean, of course they need, carbs and stuff as well, and salt, but yeah, they're burned out on it's like a candy binge basically. Like goodness. But okay, so we'll transition to the wheel conversation here, since we're kind of getting close to the end of the hour. But let's see. Tell us a little bit about the wheel, kind of why you wanted to apply to be on the show. What kind of got you excited or interested in that?
Yeah, so this is back in 2016. I ran across the U.S. and then got back, and the funniest part of this story was that maybe like a year or two prior to this, I forget why I was even seeking this out. I truly don't remember. But I applied for the show Wipeout. Do both of you remember that show? Or
is that where they're like wrestling each other and they fall into the water or something like that?
Similar. It's like an obstacle course where stuff is trying to knock you off. So
right. Okay.
it's just you against the course, but it's like there's like windmills, you got to duck under, all this kind of stuff. And I think part of that was I worked for this company in Chicago that did mud runs, and it was like an obstacle course mud run, and I was always around that, and I was like, I think I'd be pretty good at this. So anyway, I applied for the show, didn't get selected, but then I was on this email list, and they emailed infrequently enough that I didn't unsubscribe. And so I got this email like a month after I ran across the US, and it was like, Discovery Channel is now casting for a show seeking adventurers who want to test themselves in the wilderness, or something to that effect.
Yeah.
And I was like, that sounds kind of cool. So so I applied to it, and then I got like a response. They were like, yeah, fill out this long thing and we'll be in touch. So I filled out this thing, and then for the next like 2 months, every couple of weeks, someone would reach out and ask for something else, or reach out and have another call. And then I didn't hear from anybody for like over a month.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, okay, well, they clearly are not, picking me for the show. And then one day, a casting I think it was a casting producer, called me, and they said, yeah, you're one of 30 people that's being invited to LA. We're going to pick 6 of you to be on the show. I was like, whoa. Wow. So they flew me out to LA. And there was like some stuff in the lead up to that too. Like I've always been a big believer in just like signs in our lives. Like, and there were some things that had happened along the way that I was like, it was weird. I knew it was going to happen. And so when I went into the casting process, normally I would have been like a little more nervous, like worried about what I was saying. And I was just so, not in like an arrogant way, but I was just so confident. I was like, I just know this is meant to happen. And so I was really relaxed, and then I was chosen. From the time they chose me, it was 2 weeks until we were flown to South America. So the premise of the show was 6 people were sent to South America. There were 6 different, what they called eco zones. And those eco zones were in 3 different countries, Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. And the goal was they gave you like a survival pack with basic supplies. And then you just had to survive in each location. And then it was called the wheel because they would say that like the wheel would turn, and whenever the wheel would turn, you had to pack all of your stuff up, and then they'd send you to the new location. So the goal was you were going to try to make it through all 6 locations. So when we started, they told us the entire thing was 60 days. So they're like, if you make it to the end, it's going to be 60 days. But what we didn't know was how long each individual location was going to be. So from a psychological standpoint, it was tough, because if you were in a location and doing really well, you'd be thinking like, I hope I'm here for as long as possible.
Yeah.
And vice versa. If you were really struggling, it's like, I hope the wheel turns and I get sent to the next location.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was one of two out of the six of us made it the whole 60 days, and I was one of the two people. So
Oh my
um
goodness.
yeah, it was a wild experience. And it's funny, I distinctly remember after I finished the run across the US, I told my crew, they're like, I will never do something harder than that in my life. And then like
Uh-oh.
three or 4 months later, I was on this show, and the wheel was like a million times harder than the run across the US.
Really?
Not even comparable. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Because I was just two primary reasons. One, the hunger was like unimaginable.
Oh wow.
In 60 days, I lost 40 pounds.
Oh
Um,
my goodness.
yeah, I actually, the first thing my wife said to me when I got back from the show, so funny enough, we were living in Chicago when I went on the show. She got the
Mhm.
job in Truckee while I was gone,
Oh my gosh.
and moved while I was gone.
Surprise, honey.
And then when I got back, they flew me to Reno instead of Chicago,
Oh
because we were
my
living out here. And then
yeah.
when I saw her, she gave me a hug, and the first thing she said was, "I can feel your spine," because she was like, all she could
Oh
feel was like the bones on my
yeah. Oh
body.
my
um,
goodness.
so the hunger
Wow.
was tough, and then I really underestimated the emotional distress
Mm-hmm.
of it. Wasn't just that, like, I remember going in, I was like, okay, if I make it to the end of this, that's 2 months. That's like a long time to be away from my family and friends, but it's
Mm-hmm.
2 months, like
Yeah.
sometimes that goes by in the blink of an eye.
Mm-hmm.
But what made it really tough was being completely cut off from communication from anybody. So
Mm.
for that 2 months, I had no connection to my life at all.
Wow.
And that was the part that really got to me, is like,
Mm.
after a few days, you're like, I just want to know what's going on with the people I
Mm-hmm.
love.
Yeah.
And that was really tough. So yeah,
Wow. Yeah. So were you alone in each location or were you with some of the other six?
all six were in different locations. So
Oh,
imagine it
wow.
like, yeah, like a wheel, and there's six of us, and then as the wheel
Gotcha.
turns, you go from this location to this
I
location.
see.
So
Wow.
interestingly, I always wanted to know. I would always ask so in each location there was always like two producers, or no, two camera people, a producer, and then like a local person who knew the region that you
Mm.
were in.
Mm-hmm.
It could be like a resource in case something went wrong.
Yeah.
And I would always ask either the producer or the camera people. I'd be like, "How's everybody else doing?" And every time they're like, "We can't tell you that."
Oh man.
But I was able to figure out throughout the course of it, I figured out that at least half of the people had dropped. And the reason why was, I would go from when I would switch locations, sometimes my crew would like travel with me, so like the camera people.
Oh.
And I'm like, okay, if they're traveling with me, that means there's nobody there right now, which means the person
Mm-hmm.
before me already dropped. So
Mm-hmm.
using those context clues, I figured out that at least half of the people had dropped.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and that was the other piece too. If you I didn't mention this before, if at any point you were like, I'm done, they
Mm-hmm.
have an SOS device. You just
Mm-hmm.
click it, they extract
Mm-hmm.
you and send you home. So that was
Wow.
how that worked. Yeah.
Goodness. That's wild. So,
Yeah.
did you have any like survival skills going into this besides like knowing how to use like a water purifier filter on the
Yeah.
trails? Like, what was it called?
Unfortunately, no. That was the other part of the show. There's like a lot of survival shows where there's like trained people that
Mm,
have a diverse set of skills. The point of this
mm-hmm,
show was that we were all amateurs.
mm.
Although we all joked, because so they brought us all together to meet each other before the show started. And then at the end, they brought me and the other person who made it to the end. They didn't tell
Wow.
us this, but they brought us back together and we got to
Yeah.
see each other, which was super
Oh,
cool.
wow.
But the other person that made it to the end with me, he was the only one of the group where all of us were like, this guy's the only one that's actually kind of not an amateur. He like had a
Oh,
lot of skills.
wow.
And whereas I was just like, my friends, when they would watch the show, they were like, what are you doing, man? But it was just like, I told them, from the jump in casting, I said, listen, I'm not Bear Grylls, if people know who Bear Grylls is. I'm
Yeah.
not this like outdoor expert. I love spending time in the wilderness, and I've spent a lot of
Hmm.
time there. But what, like, my one asset that I think I had, that going into that show, I was like, the one thing that's going to carry me is I have like my mind is strong and I can
Yeah.
persevere.
Yeah.
Like that's my tool.
Hmm.
And so I'm going to go all in on that and then just figure the rest out. And so
Yeah.
there was a lot of trial and error. It was like, starting fires, at times was really
Mm-hmm.
hard for me.
Yeah.
I got a lot better.
Wow.
They gave us a flint, but even with a flint, if you're in a location where it's humid or wet,
Mm,
it's just really tough to start fires if you're not used to that. So,
yeah.
yeah, there was a sharp learning curve, but I got better. Same thing with fishing. It was like 90% of the food that I ate out there was fish that I caught.
Mm,
And in the beginning, I was doing a really poor job of that. But then as it went on, I got creative, tried different things, and it started working. And yeah, it was just one of those things where, you
wow.
gotta find your way through it and just
Hmm.
take it day by day. It was really, you know, this won't come as a surprise to people listening, but my background as an endurance athlete was so helpful in so many ways,
That's
because
awesome.
it's like, you know how to work through tough situations. You understand your body and know,
Hmm.
like what your body needs. And I think more than anything, it was like that mentality of taking things day by day, hour by
Yeah.
hour, minute by minute,
Hmm.
like I couldn't get ahead of myself
Yep.
because it was overwhelming. I didn't, there was no path to the end, but if I just took it moment by moment, I could do it.
That's amazing. Do you feel like that skill set being on that show built up your confidence even more so for getting out and doing these ultra runs and stuff like that?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I've always been a big, well, so one thing an analogy I like to use with the athletes that I coach and with my friends and anyone that will listen is, is digging your well deeper. So like
Mm-hmm.
I like to think of a water well, anytime you go through anything, it doesn't have to be a race or physical thing. It could be a
Mm-hmm.
tough emotional thing in life. You
Mm-hmm.
dig this water well deeper. And then what happens is it's not that the next time you go through something tough, it's easy. It never gets easy. But
Mm-hmm.
what it does do is it gives you more resources and experience to draw from.
Mm.
So the deeper your well is, the more tools you have to help you the next time. And I all the time now, I'll be struggling or like, in the pain cave, as they say, in 100-mile race. And I'll think to myself, hey, you could be starving by yourself in South America right now.
Yes.
And like, and
Yeah.
it really it helps me. I'm like, yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. Like, I'm going to see my crew in 5 miles. This is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and so that perspective, I think, has been more powerful than anything.
100%. And I would imagine too, your friends probably feel really safe running with you out in the wilderness. Hopefully, like if you get lost, maybe you can find your way back, or at least you can make a fire and shelter. And yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
Totally. I do feel like my outdoor game leveled up during that. Although I joked with my wife afterwards, like we've always loved camping and going on
Yeah.
camping trips. And for the first like year afterwards, I was like,
Mm.
I don't even want to talk about camping. Like I just need a little bit of time before
Yeah.
we do that again.
I could see that. That's great. Well,
Yeah.
this has been so fun, and I feel like we could have dove into both of these topics so much further, but I want to kind of tie things up and be mindful of your time here. I'll circle back to your two truths and a lie. So we had, I think you said ran across 4 countries. Is that what you said?
Yep.
Um, got signed Major League Baseball contract, and then what was the middle one?
Won the showcase on The Price is Right.
Right. Okay. And Amanda and I both thought the baseball one was the lie. Which one is the lie?
You both are correct.
Oh, woohoo. Yay.
So I learned playing this game years ago that the best way to
Mm-hmm.
do it is to make it something close to the truth.
Mm-hmm.
So I was offered a Major League Baseball contract out of high school.
Oh, wow.
Oh.
I turned it down because it was so there's 50 rounds in Major League Baseball draft every
Mm,
year, and I was going to get drafted in I think it was the 42nd round.
mm,
Um, so I would have gotten like a signing bonus and stuff, but I had a scholarship to go
mm.
play Division I baseball in college, and so I felt like the scholarship was the better way to go, so I turned it down.
Nice. Good for
Yeah,
you.
yeah,
I think that's great.
yeah.
Um, and what 4 countries did you run across?
So I ran across the U.S. as I mentioned, and
Right.
then
Yes.
in 2017, myself and my friend Chris, who is English,
Mm,
we ran across Great Britain, which
awesome.
is Scotland, Wales, and England.
Wow. Oh, perfect. All in one shot. There you go.
Yeah, exactly. It makes it easy when you go to Europe.
Yeah.
You can run across like
Yeah.
10, no problem.
That's true. Yeah. A lot different than running across the United States.
Yeah.
Awesome. So let's see, where can our listeners find you if you're taking on coaching clients or social? Where can they find and follow you?
Yep. So I have a website, Adam Kimble, KIMBLE.com. You can find me on Instagram, Adam Kimble 818. And yeah, feel free to reach out with any questions or just to connect.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Adam. This has been amazing.
Yeah. Thank you, Kyla. This is awesome. I really appreciate it.